Hey everyone, before we get started, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories reach. And make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so YouTube keeps sending you more spine-chilling stories like these. Story 1. I don't know why I ever came back to Havenwood. Maybe it was the cheap rent. Maybe it was the way the dust motes used to dance in the late afternoon sun in my childhood bedroom. But mostly, it was the quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't exist in a city, a deep, heavy vacuum where the only sound is the low groan of the old house settling. I've been back 6 weeks. 6 weeks since my aunt passed and left me the place, and for the first 3 weeks it was bliss. Just the crickets and the occasional distant train horn. Then the humming started. It wasn't loud, not at first. More of a resonance, a vibration you felt in your teeth before you actually heard it. It only came out after the sun went down, after the last amber light had faded from the western sky, plunging Havenwood into its characteristic oppressive blackness. This isn't one of those towns with a lot of streetlights. When it gets dark, it gets dark. I first noticed it last Tuesday around 11:35 p.m. I was trying to read in the living room, a paperback thriller that suddenly felt cheap and silly. I kept lowering the book, trying to pinpoint the source. It was low, maybe, a steady, unwavering drone. It felt like it was coming from the foundation. I walked the perimeter of the room, putting my ear to the wallpaper. Nothing. It seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. I told myself it was the refrigerator motor, or maybe a faulty transformer down the street. Small towns have old infrastructure, right? But the fridge was new, and when I looked out the window, the streetlights were burning steady, their orange glow casting long, skeletal shadows of the oak trees. The next night it was louder, and tonight, Friday, it's a constant, thick throb that has moved subtly. It's not in the foundation anymore. It feels like it's in the attic, or worse, within the very plaster and lath of the walls right next to my head. I'm sitting up in bed now, 1:17 a.m. The clock radio glows a malevolent red. I have a pillow over my head, but it just amplifies the bone-deep vibration. It's not a mechanical hum anymore. It's too organic. It sounds like 1,000 forgotten wasps, wings beating in perfect, terrifying synchronicity. I got up, heart pounding a frantic drum against my ribs. I had to know. I had to stop the guesswork or I would go crazy. I grabbed the heavy Maglite flashlight from the bedside table. Its beam cut a nervous, yellow swath through the darkness. My aunt's house is a sprawling 2-story relic from the 1940s, full of creaks and shadows that seem to move when you're not looking. The stairs to the second floor are steep, and each step lets out a high, wounded shriek. I took them slowly, the hum growing steadily louder, more demanding, with every step I ascended. When I reached the hallway upstairs, the air felt heavier, thick and warm, like I was walking into a newly opened tomb. The sound was deafening now, vibrating the floorboards under my bare feet. It was definitely coming from the storage room at the end of the hall, the room my aunt always kept locked, saying it was just junk, dear, don't bother. Junk? What kind of junk hums with the intensity of a jet engine? I tried the door handle, locked of course. I retreated to the bathroom, rummaging through the old medicine cabinet. Not a chance. I needed clarity, not sleep. I found an old, rusty screwdriver tucked behind a forgotten bottle of mouthwash. It was flimsy, but maybe enough to jimmy the lock. Back at the storage room door, my hands were shaking so badly the screwdriver rattled against the brass plate. I could feel the wood of the door pushing against my palm. The vibration was that intense. I knelt, pushing the tip of the tool into the gap between the frame and the door jamb, praying I wouldn't snap it. Thump, thump, thump. A new sound, low, heavy, and spaced out, like something large and wounded hitting the inner wall of the room. It wasn't the rhythmic hum. It was a separate, deeply unsettling percussion. What is in there that's alive? The question slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. Rats, a squirrel, No animal could generate this kind of sustained noise, and why was it always locked? My aunt was eccentric but not paranoid, or was she? The lock finally gave with a sickening crunch of splintering wood. I froze, the maglite beam shaking violently. Silence. The humming had stopped. The thumping was gone. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I pushed the door open, a high, piercing whistle of air escaping the room. The smell hit me instantly, a noxious blend of must, stale dust, and something sharply metallic, like old blood or rust. I swept the flashlight across the room. It wasn't a storage room. It was bare. No boxes, no furniture, just a thin, cracked layer of linoleum floor and peeling, mildewed wallpaper. One wall, the interior wall I shared with the stairwell, looked different, darker, like the plaster had been recently repaired or, worse, stained. I took one step in. The air was cold, despite the warmth I felt on the other side of the door. My shadow stretched long and distorted behind me. Then I heard it again, a whisper this time. It wasn't the hum, but it was coming from the dark patch on the wall. "You shouldn't have done that, Jamie." It was my aunt's voice, dry like dead leaves crunching. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. It rolled toward the dark wall, its beam pointing straight up at the ceiling, momentarily blinding me as I frantically shielded my eyes. "Aunt Lillian," my voice was a terrified squeak. "What is this, are you?" The humming started again, not inside the walls, but from behind them. It was faster now, accelerating like a flywheel, and the whisper came again, not from one spot, but seeming to vibrate out of the entire wall. "He doesn't like strangers, dear, and he doesn't like being woken up." Who is he?" I finally snatched the flashlight off the floor, the beam catching the wall in a terrifying, fixed spotlight. The stain wasn't a stain. It was a section of the wall where the plaster had been cut away and then replaced, hastily, poorly, leaving a faint outline of a rectangle roughly the size of a door. My eyes followed the outline down to the floor. There was a thin, dark line of what looked like dried sap or wax running all around the baseboards, sealing the room. A ritual circle, a barrier. I backed toward the door, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might punch through my chest. My mind was screaming, "Seal the room. Get out of Havenwood." But as I reached the door, the whispering stopped, replaced by a sound that made my blood run instantly cold. A scraping, not fast but deliberate. The sound of a single, long fingernail being dragged slowly, agonizingly, down the inside of the plaster. It came from the center of that rectangular patch. Then the hum changed pitch, rising from a low drone to a high, unbearable shriek. The scraping stopped, and a new sound began, the awful, wet sound of something gnawing at the wood and plaster, trying to chew its way out. I slammed the storage room door shut, fumbling blindly for the broken lock. I grabbed the screwdriver, jamming the bent metal piece back into the splintered wood, knowing it wouldn't hold. I didn't run, I couldn't. My feet were cemented to the floor. I just stared at the door, the gnawing sound getting louder, closer, more desperate. My aunt whispered one last time, her voice thin and full of profound regret. "He needs to feed now, Jamie. And you brought him the key." The door bucked, not violently, but a single, powerful shove from within, rattling the frame. The screwdriver shot out of the broken lock mechanism and clattered onto the floor. I turned and fled, not down the stairs, but into the nearest bedroom, collapsing onto the bed and pulling the covers over my head, a grown man hiding from the dark. The gnawing is still going, relentless. The humming is a triumphant, high-pitched scream. I know the door won't hold. I know that thing, whatever my aunt kept sealed up here, knows I'm downstairs. How long before it breaks through the thin wood? And what happens when a thing that has been starving in the dark for years finally gets to look at the light? I'm shaking. I can hear the plaster cracking now. I'm not sure I'll make it to morning. Story 2. The first missing person in Oakhaven was just a fluke. the town sheriff, Dale, said. Young Timmy Harris, 17, ran off to the city, Dale figured. Got tired of the smell of the lumber mill. But Oakhaven doesn't send its kids to the city. Oakhaven kids get jobs at the mill, marry their high school sweethearts, and die here. That was the law of the land. I run the hardware store. Been here 30 years. I know every loose floorboard in every house, and I know every secret in every family. And I knew Timmy didn't run. Timmy was scared of the dark and more scared of disappointing his mother. 2 weeks after Timmy vanished, it was Mrs. Gable. She didn't disappear. She was found. I was the one who found her, actually. I was delivering a new roll of chicken wire to her place, a small, isolated cabin near the defunct Willow Creek logging road, about 3 miles outside of town proper. I knocked, no answer. The door was unlocked. The air inside was thick and cold, even though it was a stifling August afternoon, and the smell, copper and something like burnt sugar. It was the living room, a neat little space with doilies on every surface. But Mrs. Gable was sitting in her rocking chair, facing the empty fireplace. She was intact physically, except for what had been done to her face. It was meticulous, horrifyingly precise. The police called it severe mutilation. But that wasn't right. Mutilation is messy. This was an act of removal. Her eyes, her nose, her mouth, they weren't cut out. They were carved out, cleanly, like a sculptor taking marble from a block. And in the empty sockets where her eyes should have been, he had placed 2 small, perfectly smooth, white river stones. I spent 3 hours giving my statement to Dale in the back of my own store, the smell of sawdust and paint thinner suddenly cloying. Dale was sweating, rubbing the back of his neck. This ain't Oakhaven, Frank. This is city stuff. We got a tourist, a psycho passing through. Dale, I remember saying, my voice hollow. Those river stones, they're from the bend in Willow Creek, right behind the old Miller property. Only people who grew up here know about that spot. That was the point of no return. The understanding that the monster hadn't arrived in Oakhaven. He had been born here. The town went into a panic chokehold. Windows were shuttered. Doors were triple locked. Curfew wasn't official, but by 7 p.m. the only sounds were the dogs barking nervously at their own shadows. Every stranger who bought gas or a sandwich was eyed like a snake in the grass. But the carver wasn't a stranger. He was one of us. My job became a nightmare. Everyone needed locks, deadbolts, window bars. They were prepping their homes for a siege. And I, the man selling them the tools of their defense, knew it was useless. A man who can carve a face with that kind of precision can get through a 1/text-inch steel bolt. The third victim was found exactly 1 week later. Old Mr. Henderson, the librarian. Same MO, the face removed with surgical, chilling detail. The stones. This time, he was found in the library's local history section, sitting at a reading desk, a blank, leather-bound journal laid open before him. I was the first person Dale called after the discovery. Frank, you gotta come down here. This one feels like a message. It was a message. On the blank pages of the journal, meticulously written in a cursive script that looked like something out of the 1800s, were 3 words. The town is blind. That's when the sickness really set in. The paranoia turned inward. We started looking at each other. Who in Oakhaven had that kind of steady hand? Who was quiet? Who was too normal? I thought of the quiet young man who fixed the town's clocks, his hands steady as a surgeon's. I thought of the butcher, who knew the anatomy of every creature he touched. I thought of Dale himself, exhausted and hollow-eyed, maybe losing it under the pressure. But mostly, I thought of Arthur. Arthur Frayne used to work with me at the hardware store when he was a kid. Quiet, gentle, strange. Arthur had a knack for wood carving, not little birds or trinkets. Arthur carved life-sized wooden masks. He'd spend hours whittling away, making them perfectly smooth, perfectly hollow. He moved out of town about a decade ago, said he needed to find a place where people understood quiet. I hadn't seen him since, until yesterday. I was closing up at 9 p.m., the street lamps casting that sickly yellow light. A beat-up Ford pickup with Montana plates was idling across the street, and sitting behind the wheel, staring right at my store window, was Arthur. He didn't wave. He just watched. Then he slowly pulled away. The connection hit me with the force of a heart attack. The precision, the hollow feeling of the victims' faces. Arthur was carving a human mask, not from wood, but from the memory of a face, using his victims as the blocks of marble. I rushed back to the police station. Dale was there, slumped at his desk, whiskey bottle half empty. I told him about Arthur, the carving, the timing, the pickup truck. Dale just stared at me. Arthur, gentle Arthur. Frank, I know you're stressed, but Arthur wouldn't hurt a fly. The Stones, Dale. Where did Arthur play as a kid? Willow Creek, right behind Miller's. He used to stack those white stones like little sculptures. Dale stood up slowly, a haunted look in his eyes. He moved back a month ago, Frank, staying in his daddy's old cabin, up by Willow Creek. That night Friday was the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep. The thought of Arthur, that quiet, gentle boy sitting alone in that cabin, surrounded by the remnants of what he'd done, was paralyzing. At 2 a.m. the phone rang. It wasn't Dale. It was a hysterical Mrs. Harris, Timmy's mother. Frank, I saw him. Arthur. He was carrying something in a sack down the back road, heading towards the mill's furnace. The mill's furnace, used for disposal of industrial waste, burning 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, even when the mill was shut down. I grabbed my hunting rifle. I knew Dale was useless, drunk, or maybe just paralyzed by fear. I had to go. I had to know what Arthur was disposing of. The drive out was a blur of darkness and gravel. The moon was thin, hidden behind a sickly cloud cover. When I reached the mill, the furnace was roaring, a monstrous, hungry orange eye in the darkness. I crept around the back, rifle trembling in my grip, and there he was, Arthur. His back to me, silhouetted against the intense, hellish heat. He was wearing an old oilskin apron. He was standing by the furnace, not disposing of anything but working. He had a wooden table set up, lit by a single battery-powered lantern, and on the table, laid out neatly, were 3 items, each resting on a velvet cloth. They were perfectly preserved, thin sheets of what looked like white leather. The eyes, the nose, the lips of his victims. He hadn't destroyed them, he had cured them. He was using a long, wicked-looking needle and thread. He was sewing the pieces together. Arthur, the name escaped my lips, a strangled cry. He didn't jump, he simply turned slowly. In the reflected furnace light, his face was calm, serene, but his eyes, they were completely blank, devoid of feeling. "Hello, Frank," he said, his voice soft like a church mouse. "I needed better materials this time. Leather is too stiff." He held up the horrifying thing he was creating. It wasn't a mask. It was a grotesque, 3-dimensional tapestry of human facial fragments, stitched together with surgical precision. It was horrifyingly beautiful in its own twisted way. "They wouldn't look," Arthur whispered, turning back to his work. "They were all so blind, focused on the surface. Now I'm making something that truly sees the town, an eye that never closes." I raised the rifle. My hands were steady now. The fear was replaced by a cold, hard rage. "It ends now, Arthur," I said. He didn't flinch. "It never ends, Frank, it just finds new material." I pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening, echoing off the steel walls of the mill. Arthur slumped, the needle dropping from his lifeless fingers. The tapestry fell mercifully into the dust. I called Dale. I didn't wait for him. I walked over to the table, staring at the creation. I picked up the leather-bound journal Arthur had taken from the librarian. I flipped to the next blank page, and using Arthur's own pen, I scrawled 3 new words underneath his original message. "The carver is done." The mill foreman found me sitting there at dawn, the furnace still roaring, the smell of gunpowder and blood mixing with the scent of pine. Dale finally showed up, pale and sick. We told the town it was a scuffle, that the evidence was destroyed in the furnace. We told them the killer was dead and that Oakhaven could breathe again. We buried Arthur quietly, miles from anyone. But sometimes, when I'm closing the hardware store and the town is dark and silent, I look at the locks on my own doors, and I wonder if Arthur, with his quiet, terrifying vision, was right. We looked at him for years and never saw him. We didn't see the monster until he was already standing in the light, holding his terrible creation. And I wonder how many others like him are still out there, in Oakhaven, just waiting for the next quiet night to begin their work. Story 3. I moved to Black Creek thinking I was smart. I bought the old ranger's cabin, deep in the woods skirting the town line, cheap. I wanted isolation. I wanted quiet. I wanted to write my novel without the city noise drowning out my thoughts. It turns out, silence has its own kind of roar, and isolation just means no one can hear you scream. It started with the dog. Not my dog, I don't have one. It was a stray, a massive black Labrador mix that had been hanging around the edge of my property for a few days. I left out some water, maybe a handful of dry biscuits. He wouldn't come close. He just stood 20 feet into the trees, completely motionless, staring at the cabin. I found his head on my porch 2 nights ago. It was placed neatly on the welcome mat, not torn off, but cut. A smooth, clean decapitation that left no blood on the wood. His eyes were wide open, looking up at the sky, and his mouth was pulled back in a silent, horrible snarl. I didn't call the sheriff. Sheriff Brody is a good man, but he's old and weary. He'd chalk it up to a mountain lion, tell me to buy a bigger gun and forget about it. But a mountain lion doesn't use a fillet knife. I buried the poor thing in the back 40 and spent the rest of the day checking the windows. They're old, single-pane glass. The doors are solid wood, but the locks are flimsy. Then the second thing happened. Last night, after a nervous, sleepless night, I noticed it when I went to fetch water from the well pump. Someone had left a gift. Not on the porch this time, but hanging from the rope of the well, swaying gently in the cool morning air. It was a piece of 8 by 10 cardstock, tied with kitchen twine. On it was a crude drawing. It was a sketch of my cabin, detailed, right down to the little dent in the aluminum gutter I haven't fixed. And in the main window there was a stick figure of me, sitting at my desk, head bowed, clearly writing. Underneath, written in thick black marker, "Bad chapter, try the end." My blood went cold. I hadn't opened the curtains all night. I keep a single lamp on the desk. This wasn't some casual drive-by. This meant someone had been standing out there in the pitch black of the woods for hours, watching me work, watching my life. I finally drove into Black Creek to see Brody. The town felt hostile, every local staring at my dusty truck. When I got to the station, 2 desks, 1 blinking fluorescent light, Brody was reading a paperback. I showed him the drawing. I told him about the dog. He took a long, slow drag from his coffee. "Frankie," he said, using my first name, which I hate. "This is the woods. We got coyotes, we got kids with too much time. You got a bad neighbor, maybe. Did you piss anyone off at the general store?" Sheriff, whoever this is, knows what I'm doing in my own house. They knew I was writing a bad chapter. Brody sighed. "I'll cruise out tonight, but I can't sit there, Frank. You need to keep your lights off and your doors locked. Don't be out after dark. You're isolated, son. It's what you wanted, isn't it?" I left feeling worse than when I arrived. Brody wasn't going to help. I was on my own. I bought 3 things. A heavy chain for the main door, a box of 12-gauge shells, and a cheap digital camera that connects to my laptop via Wi-Fi. I spent the afternoon rigging up a single, low-resolution camera aimed at the front path. It wouldn't catch a license plate, but it might catch a shadow. I chained the front door shut, the metal groaning with the stress. The worst part of this kind of paranoia is that it makes you doubt everything. Is it the gas station attendant who gave me a weird look? Is it the old woman who sells eggs who always asks too many questions about city folk? Or is it someone completely unknown, someone passing through, who just picked my isolation as a new playground? The sun went down at 7:45 p.m., and the tension, the slow, agonizing build I was trying to avoid, immediately took hold. I was sitting in the dark kitchen, the shotgun leaning against the counter, listening. The wind was starting to pick up, a low moan in the tall pines that sounded horribly like distant speech. I had the camera feed open on my laptop, the screen turned down low. The frame was black, dominated by the shadows of the porch and the thick, black tree line beyond. For 3 hours, nothing, just the flickering static of the low-light lens. I was starting to relax, telling myself Brody was right. Maybe it was just a local prankster. Then at 10:52 p.m., a notification popped up on my screen. Motion detected. My heart slammed against my ribs. I stared at the screen, my breath held tight in my chest. Nothing, still black. I almost dismissed it. Then it moved. Just a flicker, a momentary shift in the deep darkness near the huge pine to the left of the path. It was a shadow that didn't belong to the trees. It was too compact, too low to the ground. My stomach dropped. It wasn't standing, it was crawling. It moved with a terrifying slowness, a deliberate, agonizing inch-by-inch progress toward the porch. It was bulky, and when it passed under the faint moonlight filtering through the branches, I saw a flash of fabric, a heavy, dark coat. I snatched the shotgun, my hands sweating on the cold metal. I crept to the front window, pressing my face against the dusty glass, peering out into the absolute blackness. I couldn't see a thing. The camera was my only eye. The figure was now at the edge of the porch, just below the camera's view. I could hear it now, a very faint, rasping sound, like dry leaves being dragged across rough concrete. Is it one person? Is it wearing a mask? Why is it crawling? I heard a small thud on the porch boards, then a scratching sound, like fingernails on wood. I risked a glance at the screen. The figure had moved. All I could see now was the very top of a head, a messy shock of dark hair just visible above the porch railing. It was completely still. I backed up, moving deeper into the shadows of the living room. I needed to know who it was. I needed a face. I tiptoed to the side window, the one facing the overgrown garden. The watcher wouldn't expect me to be here. I slowly, painstakingly lifted the edge of the curtain, just a hair. And I saw him. He wasn't on the front porch. He was directly outside this window. He was a man, thin and gangly, dressed in dark work clothes. He wasn't crawling. He was squatting low to the ground, almost like a predator before a spring. And he wasn't looking at the cabin. He was looking at me. His head was tilted unnaturally, and the moon caught his face. It wasn't the gas station attendant. It wasn't anyone I recognized from Black Creek. He had a look of intense, quiet concentration on his face, like a child watching a bug in a jar. And in his hands he was holding something, a notebook. I froze, locked in his gaze. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just held up the notebook slowly, deliberately. It was open to a new page, and he had just finished writing one word, visible even in the low light: Finn. The sound of the front door's wooden frame splintering under tremendous pressure ripped through the silence. The figure at the window didn't pause. He gave me a slow, wide, chillingly satisfied smile. It wasn't a smile of malice, but of accomplishment. The kind of smile an author gives when he's finished his final sentence. He dropped the notebook, and he reached out a long, pale hand, tapping once on the glass. I didn't think. The sound of the front door being torn open galvanized me. I turned, lifting the shotgun, pointing it at the dark doorway leading into the front hall. Two of them? There are two of them. The crawling figure from the porch, the one who broke the door chain, was now standing inside. It was wearing a long, black trench coat. It was much smaller than I thought, almost diminutive. It raised its hand slowly, letting the coat fall open, and I realized the truth. The Watcher hadn't been writing fin for my story. He had been signaling the start of the climax. The smaller figure standing in my hallway wasn't holding a weapon. It was holding the dog's body, the one I thought I buried. Its head was sewn back on, crudely, the stitches dark and thick, giving the dog a macabre, puppet-like appearance. And as the figure at the window began to slowly, calmly smash the glass with his fist, the thing in the doorway dropped the dog and let out a sound that wasn't human, a high, rattling cackle. I fired. I emptied both barrels into the darkness of the hallway. The recoil slammed me back against the kitchen counter. The noise was unbearable. Silence, a high-pitched ringing in my ears, the smell of sulfur and burnt powder. I checked the window. The glass was shattered, but the man was gone. I checked the hallway. The figure was gone. Only a large, dark, wet smear of something soaked into the old wood floor remained. The dog's body was nowhere to be seen. I stumbled backwards, dropping the empty gun. I ran to the back door, tore it open, and ran out into the woods, not caring about the darkness, only the need to escape the house. I'm miles from the cabin now, hiding in a shallow ditch under a tangle of brush, shaking uncontrollably. I can't go back. I can't go to Brody. I know I hit the figure in the hallway. I know I heard the glass break, but they vanished without a trace, taking their horrible prop with them. The Watcher didn't want my life. He wanted my fear. And as I look back through the trees, I can see the lights of Black Creek in the distance. And I realize the horrifying thing. They didn't leave because they were scared. They left because the scene was over. When will the Watcher decide the next chapter begins? I can feel my heart slowing, the adrenaline fatting, and in the silence of the pines I can hear a distant, low sound, almost a whisper, that sounds horribly like a pen scratching against paper. The story isn't over. It's just paused. Story 4. I inherited the worst farm in Ember Falls. Not the land itself. The soil here is rich, black, and hungry, but the reputation. Everyone knew the previous owner, Old Man Hemlock, hadn't died naturally. His neck had been snapped, clean as a dry twig, and the local police, who don't like paperwork, called it a tractor mishap. But the old-timers whispered about the things Hemlock kept buried, and the price the land demanded in return for its bounty. I moved into the farmhouse last spring. I didn't care about the rumors. I cared about the low price and the chance to start fresh. I bought a truck, fixed the irrigation, and started planting corn. Tall, thick, beautiful corn that grew faster and higher than any crop I'd ever seen. By mid-August, the stalks were over 10 feet high, creating a suffocating, rustling maze that swallowed the farmhouse whole. The problem started with the smell. It wasn't manure or fertilizer or rot. It was metallic and sweet, like stale honey mixed with pennies. It came on strong after the sun went down, a heavy, sickly vapor that seemed to sink down from the canopy of corn stalks and cling to the low ground. I'd wake up choking on it, the smell coating the back of my throat. Then came the silence. The cornfield should have been teeming with life at night. Raccoons, field mice, crickets, a cacophony of sound. But after midnight, the air went dead. A profound, unnatural silence where the only thing you heard was your own pulse hammering in your ears. It felt less like silence and more like a profound, universal holding of breath. I tried asking around town. I went to the feed store, the closest thing Ember Falls has to a community center. I brought it up to Jedediah, the owner, a gaunt man who only ever spoke in riddles. Jedediah, my fields are silent, not a cricket, and the air smells like a slaughterhouse. Jedediah didn't look up from his ledger. The soil is rich, boy. It takes what it needs. Don't worry about the smell. Just worry about what you pull up in the harvest. He didn't explain. He just went back to his numbers, leaving me with that sickening, prophetic warning hanging in the air. What you pull up in the harvest. The harvest started 2 weeks ago. I rented a harvester from the co-op. a massive, roaring combine that tore through the stalks like a shark through water. The first few rows were fine, thick, gold ears of corn, but as I cut deeper into the field, moving toward the center, the machine started to jam. I'd have to stop, climb down, and check the header. The first time it stalled, I found a tangle of shredded fabric caught in the spinning blades. It was an old piece of coarse canvas, stained a deep, unsettling brown. I tossed it aside and kept going. The second time, deeper in the field, it stalled with a screech of metal on something hard. I climbed down, flashlamp in hand. Stuck in the header, wedged tight against the feeder mouth, was a human jawbone. Small, pale, and surprisingly heavy. It had been stripped clean, perfectly polished by the machinery, with 2 molar teeth still stubbornly intact. My stomach churned. I immediately thought of Hemlock's death, not a tractor mishap, but perhaps a clumsy attempt to hide what he'd found. I didn't call the sheriff. I didn't trust him or this town. I remembered Jedediah's words. Ember Falls knew about this. They knew what the rich soil of Hemlock's farm required. I threw the bone into the woods and backed the harvester out. I was shaking, sick with panic. I decided I would only cut the perimeter and then burn the rest of the field to the ground. Let the evidence go up in smoke. But the fear of the loss, all that potential profit, was a powerful thing, and the corn, towering over me, seemed to whisper, "Keep cutting." I tried again tonight, 1 a.m. The moon is a bloodless sickle in the black sky. The harvester's huge, single lamp cuts a beam of pure terror through the corn stalks. I'm wearing heavy gloves, a thick jacket, and a headlamp. I'm deep in the field now, where the corn is so tall and thick that the harvester's engine noise is muffled, distant. The sick sweet smell is overpowering here. The machine jammed again. This time, I knew what I would find. I shut off the engine, plunging the world into that terrifying silence, broken only by the crackle of the cooling metal. I climbed down, flashlight cutting a tight circle of light around the header. It wasn't a bone this time. It was a whole arm, small, thin, and severed cleanly just below the shoulder. The flesh was strangely preserved, the skin pale and taut like tanned leather. It wasn't recent, but it wasn't skeletal either. The whole arm was tangled up in the stalks like a scarecrow's limb. I recoiled, stumbling back against the huge, heavy tire of the combine. I kept the light fixed on the arm, and that's when I saw the tattoos on the forearm. 3 small, hand-poked stars. I'd seen those stars before. They belonged to Sarah Jenkins, a girl who disappeared from Ember Falls 3 years ago. The police decided she ran off with a trucker, but she hadn't run off. She'd been planted. I felt the panic clawing at my throat, but beneath it, a cold, clinical horror took over. I needed to see what else the soil had grown. I dropped to my knees, shining the light at the base of the stalks. The corn here wasn't growing from the ground exactly. It was growing from a vast, dark, undisturbed mound of earth that had been piled up over something massive. And sticking out from the side of the mound, where the harvester blade had sheared away the top layer, was something dark and glossy. I reached out, my fingers scraping away the rich black soil. It was hair, a long, thick clump of dark hair, still attached to a scalp. I clawed at the dirt, adrenaline giving me strength, until the shape began to reveal itself. It wasn't a collection of separate bodies. It was one single, gargantuan tapestry of remains, all pushed together, intertwined with the roots of the corn, the dark soil acting as a preserving medium. The corn wasn't just growing in the grave. It was growing from the bodies. The rich, black soil was enriched with decades, maybe centuries, of this horrifying annual harvest. I started to scramble backwards, back towards the open field, when I heard the sound. A low, deep, guttural slurping sound, coming from the depths of the corn stalks around me. It was wet and heavy, like something huge dragging itself through mud. My flashlight beam, shaking violently, caught a movement. Not far, maybe 20 feet away, a shadow was shifting among the rows. It was too low to be a man, too big to be a deer. The thing stopped, the slurping stopped, and a new sound emerged, a slow, heavy sniff. It was hunting me, the thing that came to feed on the metallic sweet air of the night, the guardian of the grotesque harvest. I tried to be silent, backing up toward the harvester's ladder, but a dried corn stalk snapped under my heavy boot. The sniffing instantly accelerated, and then a sound I will never forget, the sound of something large breaking through the stalks with terrifying speed, heading directly toward the sound of my snap. I turned and scrambled up the steel ladder of the combine. I didn't bother starting the engine. I just hauled myself up into the cab, slammed the thin door shut, and locked it. I dropped to the floor, panting, peering through the scratched glass of the cab window. The headlights were still on, slicing through the rows. And then it was there, standing directly in the beam of light, just a few feet from the massive front tire. It was immense, maybe 7 feet tall when it stood fully upright. It was hunched, its entire body covered in a thick, coarse matting of dried mud, corn silk, and shredded flesh. It didn't have a recognizable face, just a slick, dark dome with two huge, pale eyes that seemed to reflect the headlight beams with an unnatural, hungry gleam. It wasn't a man. It wasn't an animal. It was a ghastly, agglomerated thing, a byproduct of the tainted soil, the thing that Old Man Hemlock had tried and failed to bury. It raised one massive, mud-caked arm, its fingers ending in thick, curved claws, and it brought that arm down, slamming it against the huge front tire, the impact making the entire combine shudder violently. The creature made no sound but its heavy, wet breathing. It simply stared up at me, sensing my fear, knowing I was trapped inside its steel shell. I have nowhere to go. The windows are too small to climb through. The doors are flimsy. The engine is dead. I can hear the creature circling the combine, its heavy body scraping the metal. I'm huddled here, listening to the corn rustling around me, a sound that no longer sounds like wind, but like 1,000 tiny voices celebrating the return of their warden. The creature just slammed its entire body against the front of the combine. The engine block groaned. I know it's just a matter of time before it finds a way to peel back the sheet metal. Is this how the old man died? Trapped in his own machine, waiting for the soil's guardian to claim its rightful prize? I close my eyes, trying to block out the rhythmic thudding against the metal, and in the pitch dark of the cab, I can taste the metallic sweet air on my tongue. The harvest of Ember Falls is ready, and I was the one who came to pull it up. The creature just managed to tear off one of the metal side mirrors with a shriek of bending steel. It's working its way to the cab. I'm next. I'm the last crop of the season. Story 5. Everyone in Black Rock knows two things about Lake Silas. It's deeper than any lake its size has a right to be, and it keeps its secrets. It doesn't give up bodies. It keeps them. I've known that since I was a kid skipping stones off the rotting dock, and last night I put my biggest secret right in the middle of it. It wasn't supposed to happen. It was a stupid argument over money, over the deed to my father's fishing boat, actually. Ben and I were business partners, friends since kindergarten, but Ben had a habit of drinking too much and thinking he was owed more. The shouting escalated in his garage around 10 p.m. He shoved me into the workbench, and the old, heavy pipe wrench I kept there slipped into my hand. I didn't mean to swing it that hard. I didn't. But when I saw him on the greasy concrete floor, his eyes wide and vacant, the side of his head slick with a black shine, I knew I was done. It wasn't the law I feared most. It was the town. Black Rock loves its own. They'd never forgive me for taking Ben, even if they knew he was a loudmouthed drunk. So I did what every fool in a small town does when they panic. I remembered the water. It took 3 agonizing hours. Moving his body, which felt impossibly heavy and resistant, from the garage, across the uneven yard, and into the trunk of my beat-up sedan. The car stank immediately, a horrible mix of oil and blood. I drove the back roads, the moon hiding behind a low curtain of cloud, the trees along the road whipping past like terrified ghosts. I stopped at the public boat ramp, deserted at 2 a.m. The air was cold, damp, and perfectly silent, the kind of silence that feels judgmental. The lake water lapped softly at the concrete ramp, a hungry, rhythmic sound. The worst part was the weight. I'd bought cheap, 50-pound bags of concrete mix from the hardware store last week for a small repair job. I ended up needing 4 of them, duct-taped ruthlessly to his legs and torso. The white concrete powder coated his jacket, turning him into a grisly, chalk-dusted statue. I pushed the body out onto the dock. It slid with a horrible, dragging friction. I stood there, heart hammering, staring at the oily black surface of Lake Silas. And then I heard the sound that made my skin crawl. A cough, just a short, dry human cough, coming from the shadowed boathouse at the very end of the dock, maybe 50 feet away. My blood ran cold. Who would be out here at this hour? It wasn't loud, but in that profound silence, it was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I froze, every muscle tight. The darkness was absolute down there, swallowing the ramshackle boathouse whole. I waited, maybe a minute, maybe an eternity, nothing. I told myself it was a fish or the wind. It had to be. I had to finish. I bent down, grabbed Ben's collar, and with a desperate, frantic surge of adrenaline, I hauled him to the edge of the dock. The concrete bag scraped the wood. Splash! The sound was shockingly loud, shattering the night. The water immediately calmed, leaving only a few concentric ripples that faded into the darkness. Gone. Lake Silas had taken its payment. I scrambled back into my car and sped away, not looking back. I drove until the sun began to paint the eastern sky a weak, nervous gray. I cleaned the trunk as best I could with rags and bleach in an abandoned quarry lot. The sharp chemical smell, a sickening contrast to the metallic scent that still clung to my clothes. When I finally got home, the town was starting to wake up. Mrs. Gable across the street was watering her petunias. She waved. I waved back, the smile feeling like a stretched, brittle thing. And that's when the true paranoia set in. I was in my kitchen, pouring a desperate cup of stale coffee, when I saw the note stuck to the front of my refrigerator. It wasn't my handwriting. It was a neat, precise, almost childlike script. It simply said, "Heavy load, did you scrape the dock?" I dropped the mug. It shattered, splattering hot coffee and ceramic shards across the linoleum. It couldn't be. I hadn't gone back to the dock. I hadn't told anyone. I ran to the front door, yanking it open. Mrs. Gable was gone. The street was empty. Who put it there? When my house was locked, I live alone. I spent the next 2 hours in a state of hypervigilance, walking from room to room. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. The house was screaming silence. Then I went to my laptop. I had an email sent exactly 4 a.m. The subject line, RE fishing trip. The email body was blank except for one attachment, a single image file. I clicked it, my hands shaking so badly I almost missed the mousepad. The picture loaded slowly. It was a photo taken in near darkness, grainy and blue-tinged. It was taken from the boathouse. It showed the dock, my car's distinct taillights, and in the foreground my own shape, hunched over, poised at the edge of the dock. It clearly showed me throwing Ben into the lake. It was a perfect, damning piece of evidence. And the camera that took it was positioned right where that cough came from, the watcher. I smashed the laptop screen with my fist. The glass crunched and cracked. I ripped the monitor cable out of the wall, but the image was already burned into my mind. Now it's late afternoon. I'm sitting in the back corner of the diner sipping a Coke I can't taste. I'm watching every face, every glance. Is it the quiet waitress who just slid my check across the table with that knowing little sigh? Is it the old man reading the paper, whose eyes keep flicking up over the top edge of the newsprint? Ben's wife, Sarah, walked in 10 minutes ago. She hasn't reported him missing yet. She looks tired, worried. She came over to my table, her face strained. "Have you seen Ben, Mark? He didn't come home last night. He's probably out on a drunk, but... I looked her straight in the eye. I didn't flinch. I saw him yesterday afternoon, Sarah. He was talking about going to the city for a few days. Said he needed to clear his head. She sighed, relieved. That sounds like him. Thank you, Mark. I'll call the police tomorrow if he doesn't call. She walked away. I felt a surge of cold triumph. I was doing it. I was going to get away with it. But when I picked up my check, I saw that the waitress had scribbled something under the total. It was written in that same neat, childlike script from the note on my fridge. The water will keep him, but how will you keep the silence? I jumped up, knocking my chair over. I stared at the waitress. She was behind the counter, washing coffee mugs, her face placid and expressionless. I ran out of the diner, my heart racing toward a point of no return. I'm back in my house now, the shattered laptop glaring at me. I realize it's not just one person. It's the town. They all know. They watched. They are playing a collective, sadistic game with me. And now I hear a noise outside. Not a car, not a door. A quiet, rhythmic sound like a shovel scraping against loose gravel coming from my backyard. I creep to the window, pulling aside the curtain. There's a figure standing in the middle of my small patch of lawn. It's too dark to make out their features, but they are holding a shovel. They are slowly, methodically digging a small, shallow hole. They stop digging. They look up directly at my window. The figure isn't threatening. It doesn't charge. It simply kneels down by the hole, and with a terrible, patient slowness, it gently places a single, smooth, white river stone into the hole. Then they stand up, tap the top of their head, a mocking gesture of I know, and walk calmly away into the darkness. They are building a memorial, a monument to my crime, right in my own yard. They are telling me that even if the lake holds Ben, the land of black rock will never hold my peace. I'm sitting here, watching the small, fresh patch of overturned earth in my lawn. I know the stone is there. I know they will keep leaving them. I know the silence will never come. How many people in this town saw me that night? How many notes and whispers will it take before I crack and give them the spectacle they crave? I feel the weight of Lake Sila's pressing down on my chest. It's not Ben's weight. It's the weight of knowing everyone knows, and they are never going to stop reminding me. Story 6. I moved to Briarwood because of the apples. They grow the best apples in the state here, fat, ruby red gala apples that people drive 3 hours just to buy at the farm stands. The whole town, this time of year, smells like cider and wood smoke. It feels like the cover of a cozy autumn magazine. But I learned quickly that Briarwood's sweetness hides a core of pure, bone-chilling rot. I opened a small pottery studio right on Main Street. Everyone was overly welcoming. Too much, maybe. They smiled with their eyes fixed just past my shoulder, and they asked the same strange question. Are you staying for the cleansing? I figured it was a local cleanup day, some kind of harvest festival tradition. I just nodded and smiled, not wanting to seem like an ignorant city transplant. Then last Tuesday, old Mr. Hemley disappeared. He was the town's quietest resident, a wizened, nearly blind man who sat on the bench outside the general store every afternoon. His disappearance was not reported to the sheriff, who is also the mayor, and the town doctor, and the town's only veterinarian, all wrapped up into one deeply unsettling package named Dale. Instead of a search party, I saw a dozen men, led by Dale, walking down Main Street with an air of grim, purposeful efficiency. They weren't carrying flashlights or bullhorns. They were carrying rakes, shovels, and long pieces of heavy chain. I stopped one of them, a young man named Billy who delivers my clay. Billy, what's going on? Where's Mr. Hemley? Billy wouldn't look at me. His face was pale and slick with sweat despite the cool air. He's gone. It's time for the cleansing, ma'am. He was necessary. Necessary. The word hung in the air, heavy and dark. I went straight to my studio and locked the door. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the state police, but I paused. What would I say? A dozen men are carrying garden tools, and a neighbor told me an old man was necessary. They'd tell me to get my head checked. I decided to watch. The men walked past my studio and headed toward the one place in Briarwood that is never used. The huge, dilapidated 19th century community silo that stands like a granite tombstone on the edge of town. It's been condemned for 50 years, deemed structurally unsound. Curiosity, that stupid, desperate need to know, dragged me out of my safe space. I waited until dark, grabbing a heavy, dull sculpting tool I could use as a weapon, and crept out of town. It was 11:35 p.m. when I reached the silo. The entire area was bathed in a sickly, pulsating orange light coming from inside the structure. The air here was different. No sweet apples, just the heavy, metallic tang I was starting to recognize as the smell of hidden, recent death. I crawled behind a rusted-out farm truck. I could hear sounds coming from the silo's dark maw, scraping, grunting, and a low, repetitive churning sound. I risked a peek around the truck's fender. The huge metal doors of the silo were wide open. A generator was running, powering two industrial work lights that cast harsh, unforgiving shadows. Inside, the men of Briarwood were working. Dale, the sheriff doctor, was supervising, his face grim but satisfied. The silo wasn't storing corn or grain. It was housing something else. In the center of the vast concrete floor, they had placed what looked like a crude, deep pit or trench. And in the trench, there was a machine. It was ancient, huge, and belt-driven, like an enormous, rusty meat grinder. The sickening churning sound was coming from its slowly rotating blades. But it was the product that made me gasp and clamp my hand over my mouth to smother the sound. Near the machine, there were several large wooden barrels like those used for cider pressing, and the men were taking shovelfuls of a thick, dark slurry from the pit and dumping it into the barrels. It looked like earth, but too dark, too viscous, and mixed into the slurry, unmistakable under the bright work lights, were thin, pale fragments of bone. I watched as three men wrestled a long, heavy chain over the edge of the pit. They strained, pulling the chain taut, and then, from the depths of the black slurry, they dragged up what was left of Mr. Hemley. He wasn't whole. He was already half-processed. The chain was wrapped tightly around his midsection. What remained of him was gray and slick, and they were pulling him towards the machine. The cleansing wasn't a cleanup. It was a disposal. I felt a wave of blinding nausea, but I couldn't move. I had to understand the why. Dale walked over to the edge of the pit, looking down at Hemley's half-submerged remains with profound exhaustion. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a man finishing a deeply unpleasant chore. "Another year, another cleansing," Dale said, his voice echoing flatly in the massive space. He was failing. The town's luck was running out. The soil demands payment, boys. You know the rule. One of the men wiped his brow with the back of a mud-caked hand. The soil. Why not just bury him, Dale? Why this? Dale kicked a loose piece of concrete near the pit. "Because the apples, son. Our fruit is the best because it drinks from the best. It drinks from the concentrated essence. They don't just want the bodies. They want the fuel ground fine. The older the fear, the sweeter the harvest." The apples, the sweet, beautiful apples, they were feeding on human remains. The reality was a cold, hard fist in my gut. I watched, horrified, as they finished their grotesque task. The machine whined, the sounds of grinding metal and breaking bone mingling with the terrible churning of the slurry. When they were done, the men sealed the barrels, wiping them down with a terrifying reverence. They looked like they were storing fine wine, not the liquefied remains of a neighbor. As they began to shut down the generator, I realized I had stayed too long. I scrambled backwards, praying the rusted truck would hide me. But as I backed up, my foot caught on a tangled vine, and I pitched forward, my hand landing on something cold and hard. I looked down. It was a small, hand-painted wooden sign half buried in the mud near the truck. It said, "Pottery Studio, new location, welcome Sarah." They knew I was watching. They hadn't just been disposing of Hemley, they had been putting on a show. They wanted me to see. They wanted me to know the price of belonging in Briarwood. I looked up, my eyes wide with terror, just as the last work light snapped off. Total darkness. The only sound was the generator's final cough before it, too, went silent. A deep voice, inches from my ear, broke the silence. "Welcome to the harvest, Sarah." It was Dale. He must have snuck up behind the truck while I was frozen in shock. His breath was hot and smelled of cloves and something metallic. He didn't grab me. He just placed a heavy, calloused hand on my shoulder. "You saw the whole process. Good. Now you know. The soil is rich, but it is never satisfied. We give it what it asks for, and it lets us live happy, sweet lives." What happens now?" I choked out, unable to move. He chuckled, a low, dry sound. Now you have two choices. You can run, but you'll tell the police and Briarwood will be ruined, and everyone knows you'd be the first to disappear. Or you can stay." He squeezed my shoulder, his grip like iron. "Stay and you belong. You'll keep the secret. And one day, years from now, when the soil asks again, when our town's luck is waning, we'll need another sacrifice. And you'll understand." He released me and walked away, his footsteps crunching deliberately on the gravel, announcing his departure. I didn't run, I couldn't. The fear was too paralyzing, the implication too profound. He hadn't threatened to kill me, he had threatened to recruit me. I crept back to my studio. The town is dark now, silent, draped in the smell of sweet, clean apples. I'm sitting here, watching the street, the air conditioning on full blast to fight the sickly scent clinging to my clothes. On my workbench next to the clay, I see a small, perfectly ripe gala apple. Someone left it there while I was gone. I pick it up. It is cold and heavy in my hand. Its skin is pristine, its taste promising nothing but perfection. Was the apple left as a reward, a peace offering? Or is it a reminder that the sweetest things in Briarwood always carry the taste of the grave? I can't eat it. I can't look at it. I know that if I stay, if I keep the silence, one day I will be one of them. And I can't leave because Dale knows my name and he knows where I live. Story 7. I knew better than to steal from Harmony Ridge. This town isn't on the map. It's a cul-de-sac of resentment and old grudges. I was only passing through, a transient, and I only planned to take the one thing, the silver locket from the old pawn shop. It was antique, beautiful, and I needed the cash to keep moving. I broke in at 3 a.m. when the town was a black hole of silence. The job was clean, a smashed display case, 2 minutes of frantic rummaging, and I was back on the highway, heading east, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against the steering wheel. I was free. I had done it. I made it 5 miles. That's when the road ended. I'm talking about a real physical end. Highway 17, the road I'd been on for 3 hours, abruptly transitioned into a fresh asphalt cul-de-sac, complete with a freshly painted white stop line and a brand new reflective dead-end sign. Beyond it, there was only dense, impassable forest. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop. I checked the dash clock, 3:15 a.m. I spun the car around, my tires spitting gravel. This was impossible. I checked the maps. Highway 17 was a main artery. I drove back fast, convinced I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. I drove for 10 minutes, expecting to see the lights of the next town, a diner, anything. Then I saw the familiar, rusted sign, "Welcome to Harmony Ridge, founded 1912. My stomach lurched. I was back. The road hadn't taken me away from Harmony Ridge. It had just taken me in a circle, a perfect 5-mile radius loop. I drove through the silent town square again. The same empty gas station, the same church with the warped spire, the same pawn shop I'd just robbed, its display window now glaringly, obviously smashed. I kept driving. I drove past the town, onto the road that led out to the east. 5 minutes later, I saw the blinding reflection of the dead-end sign again. 3:45 a.m., I was trapped. I pulled over to the side of the road, shut off the engine, and put my head on the steering wheel, trying to force my brain to process the impossible geometry of this place. Was I delirious? Was this a police trap? I looked in my rearview mirror. The town's 2 streetlights, sodium vapor lamps that cast a sickly yellow glow, were miles back. The road behind me was black, empty, silent. Then I saw the third set of lights. Not headlights. They were small, focused points of light, moving at a speed too steady to be a person walking. They were moving out of the forest where the dead-end sign stood. They weren't on the road. They were moving parallel to the road, through the impossibly thick trees. I started the engine, my hands slick on the wheel. I threw the car into drive and sped back toward the town center, hopping to find a side road, a trail, any break in the circle. As I drove, I kept glancing into the woods. The small, focused lights were still there, tracking me. They were getting closer to the edge of the road, appearing and disappearing behind the trees with chilling persistence. They looked like the eyes of hunting animals, reflecting my headlights, but they were too high up, too regular. I swerved back into the town square. 4:10 a.m., I noticed something new. In the window of the church, where the stained glass should have been, there was now a single lit candle, a very small, steady flame in the oppressive darkness. I kept driving. As I passed the gas station, I saw another candle sitting on the counter, visible through the dusty window, and at the library one more, small and watchful. They weren't just watching me. They were lighting the perimeter. The entire town was silently waking up, not to chase me, but to observe my inevitable, repeated return. I drove the loop again, faster this time, hitting the speed limit, pushing the engine. My tires screeched at the dead end. I slammed the car into reverse and looked into the woods. The lights were right at the edge now, and they weren't animal eyes. They were lanterns. Small, antique lanterns held by dark, motionless figures standing just beyond the tree line. I counted 5. 5 silhouettes standing perfectly still, watching me perform my desperate caged-rat run. They made no move to approach the road. They didn't need to. I floored the gas and drove back toward the town for the 3rd time. My panic was reaching a critical point. I started shouting in the car, trying to break the suffocating silence. When I entered the town square this time, 4:35 a.m., the changes were even more pronounced. The front door of the pawn shop, the one I had smashed, was gone, replaced by a fresh, unpainted slab of wood. And in the very center of the wood, hammered in with a single, massive iron spike, was the silver locket, the one I had stolen. The message was clear: we let you take it, we let you try to leave, now put it back. I pulled over violently, adrenaline screaming through my veins. I jumped out of the car, grabbing the nearest thing, a heavy, rusty lug wrench, and stumbled toward the pawn shop door. I yanked the locket off the door, the sharp spike tearing my palm. I stared at the door. The fresh wood, the single spike, it had been done in the last hour, while I was driving my useless loop. I didn't stop to think. I threw the locket back into the broken display case, its silver body clattering against the shattered glass. Done. I gave it back. Let me go. I ran back to my car, got behind the wheel, and floored it toward the east. I drove the entire loop. 5 minutes of pure, desperate speed, adrenaline burning out my last reserves. And there it was, the dead-end sign, glaring white in my headlights. I stopped. I didn't turn around. I shut off the engine. The sound of my own panting breath filled the silence. They hadn't trapped me with a road. They had trapped me with a condition. I looked up. The sun was just beginning to touch the highest peaks of the forest, turning the eastern sky a bruised, sickly purple. Dawn was coming. I heard the scraping of gravel. The 5 figures with the lanterns were slowly, methodically, walking out of the woods and onto the asphalt. They approached my car, their faces still hidden in shadow against the rising light. They surrounded the car, standing shoulder to shoulder. They didn't speak. They didn't raise their hands. They just stared at me through the windshield. Finally, one of them, a tall, hunched figure, slowly bent down and tapped once, gently on the glass of my window. I flinched back. The figure raised a hand, pointing slowly and deliberately, not at the road, but at the dashboard. I looked down. On the passenger side seat, tucked carefully beneath the windshield wiper, was a small, folded piece of thick, white cardstock. I hadn't seen it before. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and unfolded it. It was a note, written in a stark, clean hand. The locket was the fee, not the theft. You were supposed to leave it, not return it. Now you owe us the true price, the key. I looked back up at the figure. He tilted his head, his face still a mystery. The key, my car key, the key to the outside world, the key to my freedom. They wanted the last remnant of my independence. I looked at the dead-end sign, bathed in the growing light. The loop was permanent. The road would never open for me. With a profound, gut-wrenching realization, I pulled the key from the ignition. I lowered the window an inch. I dropped the key onto the asphalt. It landed with a faint, metallic clink. The figures didn't pick it up. They simply smiled, a collective, chillingly satisfied motion of the shadows, and stepped back, turning as one to walk back into the thickening woods. I am sitting here now. The sun is up. The air is clean and full of the sounds of birds. The road is still a dead end. My car is silent. I can walk out of Harmony Ridge. I can steal another car. But I know it won't matter. I know that road will always lead back here. I paid the fee, and now I belong to the loop. Will they let me live out a quiet life here, a permanent, terrified resident? Or will the cost of the key eventually be more than just my freedom? I close my eyes, trying to remember what the outside world looked like. The forest is quiet now, too quiet. Story 8. I came to Stillwater to fix things. Not houses, but people. I'm a structural anthropologist, and Stillwater is a time capsule, a community frozen in its isolation, with rituals and patterns that haven't changed since the 1950s. I rented a small, dry cabin a mile outside the main settlement, near the old, abandoned Purity Springs bottling plant. My first discovery was the well. It was hidden behind the plant, covered by a heavy, rusted metal disc. The plant shut down 30 years ago when the town decided the water source, the aquifer that fed the springs, had turned bad. Locals refused to talk about why, just calling it sour water. I found the well by following the strongest magnetic anomaly I'd ever recorded. I managed to pry the cover off, and the smell that erupted was overwhelming: sulfur, rot, and a dense, sweet meatiness. I dropped a heavy fishing line down. It went over 200 feet before hitting the water. But it wasn't the depth that got me. When I pulled the line back up, the grappling hook had snagged something. A piece of fabric, old, thick wool stained a blackish red. I spent 3 days carefully dredging the well with proper gear, and the things I brought up weren't just clothing. They were bundles. The bundles were wrapped in decaying wool blankets, tied with thick, nautical-grade rope. They weren't heavy. They were disturbingly light. Inside the first one, the material was mostly sludge and bone fragments, but the shape was unmistakable: the skull of a very small child, no older than 2. In the second bundle, the same thing: the small, delicate bones, the thick rope, the blackish-red wool. By the time I was done, I had recovered the remains of what my notes told me were at least 9 infants or toddlers, all expertly weighted and tossed down the well over a period of many years. This wasn't a single act of panic. This was a practice, a deeply disturbing, ritualistic thinning of the herd. Stillwater wasn't a time capsule. It was a grave. I didn't waste time going to the sheriff, a man named Hollies, whose family has run this town since the Civil War. I drove straight to the nearest 7-Eleven outside Stillwater's municipal limit, bought a cheap burner phone and called the state police. I told them everything. The location, the bundles, the horrific evidence. They told me they'd send a forensics team first thing in the morning. I had to get back to the cabin. I had to safeguard the evidence. The bundles were laid out on tarps in the back room of my rental, carefully tagged and photographed. I got back just after 11 p.m. The cabin was dark. I locked the front door, checked the windows, and started transferring the photos from my camera to a secure drive. That's when I heard the sound outside. Not a car, not a footstep, a precise, rhythmic, metallic sound like a pickaxe hitting dry earth. It was coming from the direction of the well, maybe 300 yards away. My heart hammered. The state police wouldn't be here until morning. Who is out there? I crept to the back window, parting the old lace curtains. The moon was a sliver, but the air was clear. I could see two figures, tall and broad, moving in the shadows near the wellhead. They were digging, fast and furious. And they weren't digging at the well. They were digging around it. I watched, frozen in a paralysis of horror and confusion, as they worked for 20 minutes. Finally, they tossed their shovels aside, wiped their hands on their trousers, and one of them lit a cigarette. In the brief, flickering flare of the match, I saw the face of Sheriff Hollies. He wasn't there to investigate. He was there to conceal. I realized my mistake. The phone call. I wasn't outside Stillwater's jurisdiction when I made the call. I was outside Hollies' immediate listening radius. But as soon as the state police checked the address, Hollies, the first responder for everything, would have gotten the notification. He walked over to the freshly dug earth and he reached down, pushing something large and heavy into the trench. His partner did the same. They were burying something big, something new. I pressed my face against the glass, trying to see what they were doing. And that's when Hollies stopped, looked up, and his gaze fixed with unnerving precision directly on my back window. He smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a terrible, knowing grimace of absolute confidence. He knew I was watching. He knew I had the evidence. He pulled a long, heavy length of metal cable out of his pocket and tossed it onto the ground. Then he turned and began to walk, slowly, deliberately, toward my cabin. I turned and fled to the back room. The evidence was still spread out. The 9 small bundles, the tarps, the notebooks. I grabbed the secure drive and the camera, shoving them into the inner pocket of my jacket. I tried the back door, locked from the outside. I ran to the front door. I hadn't used the deadbolt. I fumbled with the key, my hands slick with terror. Crack! Hollies hit the door once hard with something heavy. Not a fist, something solid. The frame shivered. I got the door open and bolted out into the night. I didn't head for my car. It was too predictable. I ran into the dense, thorny scrub behind the cabin, heading for the tree line. I ran until my lungs burned and the thorns had torn bloody lines into my shins. I stopped beneath a massive, ancient oak tree, desperately trying to catch my breath. The silence was deafening. No sirens, no shouts, just the crickets and my ragged, panicked breathing. Then I heard it again, the pickaxe. It wasn't far away, maybe 50 feet, the sound of metal hitting wood. Hollies wasn't chasing me through the woods. He was felling a tree, a big one. I realized his plan. He didn't want the bodies to go missing. He wanted the well to disappear. He was going to drop that massive oak right on the well head, crushing the concrete and burying the spring, the structure, and all the evidence under tons of earth. I started to crawl away, moving as silently as a snake. I needed to get to a phone, to the state police, to someone. Then a new sound cut through the night, the sound of a chainsaw roaring to life, the high-pitched whine echoing off the silent hills of Stillwater. I stopped crawling. The chainsaw wasn't coming from the well. It was coming from the opposite direction. It was coming from the road where my car was parked. I was flanked. Hollies was dropping the tree to crush the evidence. His partner, I realized with a sickening jolt, was cutting me off. I looked up at the vast, dark canopy above me. I was surrounded by ancient trees, massive, unyielding. Hollies was an expert lumberjack. He wouldn't miss. I heard the pickaxe stop. Hollies was ready. I could hear his low, guttural grunt preparing for the final blow. Crack! The sound of the massive trunk splitting was like a gunshot. The ground shuddered violently. I heard the low, terrifying sound of the oak starting to fall. It wasn't falling toward the well. It was falling toward me. I scrambled up, trying to run, but the forest floor was too cluttered with roots and rocks. The sound was deafening now, the deep, tearing groan of the wood, the rush of the air. I threw myself behind a huge boulder, just as the massive tree slammed down. The impact was cataclysmic. Earth flew up, the ground heaved, and a shower of splintered wood rained down around me. I coughed, blinded by the dust and the smell of fresh sap, but I was alive. I heard Hollies' voice, close but strained. Damn it, too far north, didn't quite get the well. I got the car, though, his partner yelled back, his voice thick with malicious satisfaction. Crushed it flat. He won't be driving out of Stillwater. I was trapped between them. No car, no phone, the evidence still locked in the cabin. The well was damaged but not destroyed. I waited until the sounds faded, the men dragging themselves back to their truck, muttering about having to fetch the bulldozer in the morning. I waited another hour, hidden under the rock, listening to the absolute, profound silence that returned to Stillwater. I crept back to the cabin. The back room was intact. The 9 bundles of small bones were still there. The secure drive was still in my pocket. I walked to the front window. The town is silent, dark. They know I'm still here. They know I have the secrets, and they know I have nowhere to go. I look at the small, dark bundles. I look at the ruined woods outside. What price will Stillwater demand for the secret of its purity springs? And when the sun rises, how will I hide the most damning evidence of a town's long, slow crime from the men who control every inch of its soil? I can hear the low, distant rumble of a diesel engine now. It's too early for the police. It's Hollies coming back with the bulldozer.